Hello and welcome to Easy Peasy Quilts. Today we're going to be doing a really fun quilt. It's called Crazy Eights and Nifty Nines, and it gets its name from the snowball block that has 8 sides, and then there's a 9-patch block on point. This quilt shows off large print fabrics, which is perfect. If you have a fabric that you've been waiting to showcase in a quilt, but you don't want to cut it up into little pieces where you lose what the fabric looks like in its essence, this is the quilt that will show off those kinds of fabrics. It's really fun, fast, easy. This video is not going to be very long because the blocks, putting them together is simple. And we'll go through each block, and I will also show you the quilting I did on this quilt. I think the simpler the piecing is in a quilt, the more fun you can have with the quilting. And so you can't see it now, but I'll show you later in the video. I have birds quilted on the quilt that really shows off another component, another level of coolness to this quilt. So let's get started with Crazy Eights and Nifty Nines. Go ahead and head to the website, pick up your pattern. That's going to show you all the dimensions of the cuts that we're doing for this quilt. It will also show you how to cut all these pieces out of fat quarters. This quilt is very fat quarter friendly. It uses the fat quarters efficiently, which is nice. And so that is a real bonus to this pattern. So this is the Crazy Eights block, and this is the Nifty Nines block. So we'll put our fabric over here for that block, for the nines block right now, and we'll concentrate on our snowball block. So this one is really easy. This is some fabric I had left over from Hobby Lobby, and I loved the angels. They're larger, which is perfect for this quilt pattern, because if I cut these angels up very much more, you wouldn't know that they were little angels. So I like this pattern for that reason. We are just going to put our squares on the corners, on each corner here. And the fabric is right side together. I know it's kind of hard to see on this fabric, but we are then going to take, and you can eyeball this when you're sewing if you're good at that. You can also draw a line from corner to corner on all the top squares. And this is heat erase pen, so you don't have to worry about that leaving a permanent mark. I'm going to go around and do the exact same thing on all the squares. So the line goes in this direction. And I am going to sew on the line. I know sometimes we sew 1/4 of an inch from the line, but on this technique, which is called a stitch and flip, we are going to sew right on that line, and I will show you what we do once that is complete. We've sewn on all of our lines here, and that is going to give us a flap right here. We are going to cut the excess seam down to 1/4 of an inch. You can use a rotary blade and a ruler. You can use scissors and just eyeball it. Either way, you know, it doesn't have to be exact. You're just cutting the excess off. So that's no biggie if it's not perfect. We'll do that to all the sides. And then I am going to press this open. So that's going to give us our snowball. And I usually like to press these seams open. I think when you do a stitch and flip that it lays a little bit better and flatter with a more square corner if you press your seams open. So I'll do that and we'll see what it looks like when we're done. Here is our snowball block all done, and we have our seams pressed open and it lays nice and flat. So that is literally all there is to half of your quilt top is done. I love easy. Our next block is called Nifty Nines, and it is our 9-patch block. It can be strip pieced, which if you look at this layout where I'm only using 2 different fabrics, it would be easy to do it that way. But if you want a more scrappy look, like in my other quilt top, it's just easier to go ahead and cut the pieces individually and piece them together in a 9-patch. So that's what I have done here. I'm trying to get a piece without a wrinkle in it. So we're just going to lay out our pieces for our 9-patch, and I'm going to sew them together in horizontal rows. So I'm going to sew these 2 pieces to that piece of fabric, these 2 pieces here, these 2 pieces here, and then we are going to press the seams toward the dark pieces. So the seams up here on this row, I'm going to press towards these pieces this way, and that way we can nest our seams when we sew our rows together, and that's going to make for really pretty nice points in our 9-patch. Here is our 9-patch piecing. You can see that we have put our seams going in opposite directions so that when we put them together, they are going to nest in those corners. So let me go ahead and put our 3 rows of piecing together and complete our 9-patch. Here's our 9-patch all done, and our points are pretty perfect. That one's a little off, doesn't bother me a bit, not worried about it. That kind of stuff does not get me worked up at all. No one is going to ever notice that. So we are going to frame our 9-patch blocks, and that is what is going to put them on point. So we have this piece of fabric. It's wrong side together from how I cut it off the bolt. So I'm going to cut 2 at a time here. And we're going to cut this piece, and this will all be in the pattern and the directions, from corner to corner. And that is going to give us our frame. And we are going to put a piece on the top, a piece on the bottom, and a piece on either side. And this is going to be a little oversized, and that is by design. I always like to make this kind of piecing a little oversized, and that way we can trim it down and get a perfect block, and our blocks will line up better and sew more nicely together. So one of the easiest ways that I use to make sure that I sew this on and it is centered, which is what we want. We don't want our triangle to be off on one side or the other. We want it to be even. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold our triangle in half, and we're just going to pinch the middle. And it's a little bit hard to see, but there is a crease right here in the middle of your block. And I'm just going to take my 9-patch and do the exact same thing. I'm going to crease that square in the middle, and there'll be a little crease there. And I am just going to set the 2 creases on top of one another and sew this seam right here. And this side of the triangle is a little stretchy. It is a bias side of the fabric, and so it will stretch, but it's not a big deal. Just be careful when you're sewing it. You're not yanking and tugging and all that, and you will not have any kind of problem. And if it does get a little wonky, we're going to trim the block. So it's, again, not a big deal. So usually what I do is I will sew this side, and then I will go ahead and sew the opposite side. And we're going to press those seams out, and then we'll add this other side. So let's start with these 2 seams. We've got our top and bottom on, and now we are going to add our sides. We have to press these pieces open or back so that we can add these. If we didn't do that, then what would happen was if we added all 4 of them together, you would never be able to open the block. So we're going to put the top and bottom, and then the same exact way that we lined up the top and bottom, we're going to do the same thing with these sides. We're going to just fold it in half and get our halfway mark, and then we are going to fold the triangle in half, lay those 2 pieces or sections on top of each other, and we are going to sew. And this should really be right at about a 1/4 of an inch where you're going to start and stop your seam. They're going to line up pretty nicely there. So let's go ahead and add the sides to this block. We are going to trim this block to 9 inches. Now because we are, 9 inches square. So because we are trimming it to that, we want to make sure that the 4.5 inch line, which is obviously between 4 and 5, runs through the point here and down here, and it also runs through the point over here and over here. That's going to give us a block that is nice and square and have our 9 patch centered. You also want to make sure that you do not cut right up to that point. You want at least 1/4 of an inch away from that point, because that's going to be your seam allowance. If you cut down to that point, you're going to cut off your point when you piece it into the quilt top. So I have this lined up to 4.5 and 4.5 here, 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 and here. And I am going to trim off 2 sides of this block. And then we're going to spin the block. And the nice thing about doing it this way is it also trims off your dog ears while you're doing that. And the second trim should be actually quite a bit easier, because then you can just line up your 9 inches on either side. I still go ahead and kind of check and make sure that I have, the 1/4 of an inch top and bottom, so we're not cutting those off, but it should line up pretty well at this point. And I'm sorry if there's a glare on this ruler. It is kind of hard even for me to see with the lights that we're using to kind of film everything. But so there we go. Now we have our 9-inch block. We did not cut down to those points. We left some seam allowance here, and that will allow us to piece our blocks together so that they are the same size. And we will do every other block. And let me get down my quilt off the wall and I will show you that up close and we can look at the quilting. So here is the quilt that was behind me and on the intro. And there's a couple things about this quilt that I really like, this fabric in particular. So you can obviously see the whole fabric, and we're not going to cut it up into little pieces so you don't lose the birds, which is really beautiful. And so you get the whole kind of image of the fabric without breaking it up. And so I love that. The other thing is, I think stripes are sometimes hard to work with in a quilt, but it really isn't with this because of the way we cut that frame piece around the 9 patch. You can't really mess up the stripes. They're gonna fall, and I like the way they fall into this block because it almost creates movement, and I think that that's really cool. The other thing with this that we kind of talked about was the quilting, and you can see the quilting in this really easily because there's not, your eye isn't so distracted by a bunch of little piecing. So you can see the birds and the stripes. You can see my bird quilting on the peach fabric here. You know, all the bigger blocks, you can really have fun with the quilting and you can make that shine as well. So that's some of the really fun features of this quilt top. One other thing that I will mention is that the snowball blocks create a secondary pattern. They create these kind of little wings around the blocks. And so I found that if I chose darker, more fun, colorful fabrics for both the frame around the 9 patch as well as the snowball blocks, and then I used a lighter fabric for the inside of the 9 patch and these stitch and flip corners on the snowball blocks, that it really created a secondary pattern that made the darker fabrics and the more the fabrics with the actual design on them really stand out and pop. So that is another thing to keep in mind when you're choosing your fabrics with this quilt. So really have fun with this quilt. You can put it together in an afternoon. It is so quick, it is so easy. The colors, the fabrics go wild with all the different designs. It would be an amazing scrap quilt, so just dig into your scraps and really have fun with crazy 8s and nifty 9s. Thank you so much for joining me to make crazy 8s and nifty 9s. This quilt pattern is perfect for using fat quarters. And we do have a quilt kit with the fabrics behind me in my shop, and I'll put a link below in the description box. I hope to make more quilt kits with this pattern. It's so much fun, and you can feature all sorts of different fabrics, and I'm really excited to kind of look through the different collections and pick out ones that you might like. So keep checking back. We're probably going to have lots of different quilt kits for this pattern, and we'll continue to have more fun with crazy 8s and nifty 9s.